afternoon and welcome to Cinema Smackdown, episode number 58 of the all-new, all-different Cinema Smackdown on CJLS 1690 AM. I'm only partially set up, so...
Not that different if we're 58 in.
Yeah, but even then.
It's an all-new for an all-new decade, except,
right.
Minus the extra year.
You're listening to CJLS 1690 AM. My name is Michael Brody, and I'm joined today by Shane Simmons. We are throwing a little episode together this week that is somewhat playing off what we did last week. So last week's show, we talked about the movie 1917, and we also touched on the film Rope, both of which were essentially cobbled together single-take movies. They...
Kind of.
Yeah, but that's
I actually had to remind myself about Rope, and it's not. It's close, but it's not. Every 20 minutes in Rope, and if we're getting right into it, in Rope, there is actually an undisguised cut, because the way films are projected in cinemas, it's generally 2 reels of 10 minutes, and every 20 minutes there has to be a reel change. So Hitchcock thought, well, it's going to be obvious that there's a switch over then. So he didn't disguise his cuts every 20 minutes of that 80-minute movie.
So what you're saying is Rope is not at all valid in this argument.
Well, it is, because the long takes are, a number of takes with magic cuts for 20-minute chunks.
Well, essentially, last week we covered those, and a few other little moments that we mentioned, like Atonement. But what I want to talk about this week is the one-take movie and the major one-take sequences in film. I have way more examples than we'll have time to get to today, so we're going to have a nice rambling conversation where we're going to cover some of the most obvious ones that people are really aware of that may or may not work for me. There are many I do not like. My number one, I'm going to go with my number one-take scene that a moment into it I thought, oh, I'm not enjoying this. Oh. The one in Children of Men. I really disliked that one. There was something so fake about it, and people love that one. That's one of the examples of the greatest one-take scenes.
Yeah, I know you're not a fan of that film, and the one-take in that is not going to impress you. Now, I will say I am less impressed by the ones that rely heavily on computer effects to see them through. If it's done practically in camera, then it can knock your socks off. But yeah, if there's a lot of post-production fiddling with it, it doesn't really count in my books.
Mm-hmm, I agree. And that one is almost entirely built out of post-production trickery and back-screen projection and all kinds of things that just, didn't look real and did not root me in the moment, which is what I want when we have these. I feel like we haven't quite properly explained this. How do you define the one-take scene, Shane?
Certainly every film is made up of many, many shots. Mm-hmm. The one-take scene is the moment in the film. It can be at the beginning, it can be in the middle, it can be at any point, or in rarer cases, the attempt of doing the whole film like this, where it is or appears to be a single long shot that follows the action, moves around quite a bit, often, sometimes not, and is sort of a showcase within the film,
right,
of technique and expertise, and it can be a bit of a bit too showman-like.
Mm-hmm. Well, I feel like it draws so much attention to filmmaking itself that it becomes impossible to be fully immersed in the moment, except when it does exactly that.
Yeah,
this is like the exception that proves the rule. Some of these one-take scenes pull me so much into the moment, and others are just an excuse for the director to show off his technique, which just keeps reminding me I am watching a constructed piece of art.
Right.
It takes me out of the story. So
there are some. There are also plenty that happen in the middle of a film where I'm already so invested in the film, it takes me a while to realize, oh, wait a minute, there hasn't been a cut for quite a while now.
Yes, and those are the best.
They are, yeah, especially in retrospect when you see the film again and you sit there and...
You realize how effective a sequence was,
yeah.
And you may not even have noticed on a first viewing that they employed this technique.
Or until you're halfway done, and the example I would use for that is Tom Yum-Goong, is it Indonesian or...
Thai?
It's Thai, it's a Thai film, yeah. Where, there's an entire action scene up a spiraling level-by-level fight. Mm-hmm. And it is absolutely phenomenal to watch because it goes on and on and on, and there's so much stunt work in it, and you realize if anything went wrong, it was a big deal to reset this and try again.
Well, I will point out that Tom Yum Goong is from 2005. I actually plan to go through these chronologically.
Sure.
But Tom Yum Goong is from 2005. It is a 3-minute, 55-second unbroken take scene where the main character goes level by level fighting guy after guy after guy, and he is visibly exhausted by the last couple of fights.
Yeah, that's Tony Jaa, and by the end of it, he really, really wants his elephant back.
It's a boss-level fight, one after another. It's quite amazing,
And
actually.
they're still pulling off stunts right to the very end of that shot that makes you go, wow, if you screwed that up, it's a reset, and you have to, like, unbreak props and put everything back the way it was.
It's been a while since I've seen it, but I seem to recall one of the later bits is someone lifts up a sink, like a bathroom sink, to hit him with, and he spins around and kicks through it in the middle of 100 other stunts.
Right.
That had to happen just right.
Oh yeah, one guy gets tossed off the balcony and smashes into stuff below.
More than one.
Yeah.
It's quite something.
There's a lot of property damage, that's my point.
Sure.
And every time you get it wrong, it's kind of like, well, let's try again tomorrow after we've rebuilt the set.
I'm going to quickly talk about the 6 or so movies that I've seen or know about that are considered one-take entire films, or they're broken that way. The same way that, and then I'll move on to epic one-ers.
Yeah. That's a good way to do it.
For one-take movies, and again, these are somewhat chronological, we've already talked about Rope. So let's move ahead to 1997's Running Time, which is a Bruce Campbell film directed by Josh Becker, which is low level as one takes go. It's
a very modestly budgeted film.
Yeah. And it has a lot of good tricks in it, but it's also very limited in scope, and it's really just a dirtbag criminal basically plotting and carrying out a crime, including an in-time sex scene, violence. Some of it works well, and some of it just feels like a bad play. And it's
a semi-experimental film, and I think the premise is sort of like, well, let's do Rope, but do it for real.
Yeah,
we're really going to do an unbroken. I think it's a 70-minute film, so it's just over that feature-length mark.
One of the issues with that movie, of course, is that Bruce Campbell is playing a dead serious character, which does not work for him.
Right.
He's not great in the movie. There's no levity. There's no charm.
Yeah, you hear Bruce Campbell and you're like, oh, I want the swagger, I want the lines, I want the fun stuff. And so much of the film is based on the premise of the one shot.
Yeah.
They didn't really give Bruce room to breathe and have fun.
So we move on to 2010 and 11, where there's a movie and a remake. The original is called La Casa Muerta, or I may be pronouncing that horribly wrong. It's basically a haunted house movie shot in one take. And then it was remade in 2011 with Elizabeth Olsen. It's called Silent House. I've seen both films. I don't like either of them. And they do feel like unbroken take movies. They feel shockingly done in a single shot. There's a lot of trickery, but it is pretty expertly done, but I wasn't brought into the story at all. So I could appreciate the technical aspect, but again, when it's a whole movie worth of this stuff, I quickly become exhausted and find that the premise sort of falls away for me at a certain point, and I just can't stop noticing the technique. So that leads us, of course, into my least favorite of all of these, which is Birdman. 2014. I just last night was having a chat with somebody about film in general, and they said, I need to confess, I really don't like Birdman. And I said, oh no, I'm 100% on board with what you're saying. I found after 10 minutes of that film I was exhausted with the technique, and it wasn't serving the narrative for me. So it just became kind of a grueling experience to watch the actors, who were all upset for the entire movie. Just go through what they're going through over and over and over and over. And I can't fault the work that's in this. It's extraordinary, but being extraordinary didn't mean I liked it. So, you still haven't seen Birdman, correct?
Oh, yeah, no, I have seen it.
Oh, you have seen Birdman. So are you pro-Birdman? Did you enjoy it? It's fine. I certainly will say it's a well-made movie.
It's an extremely well-made movie. It is an extremely well-acted movie that I didn't care for.
There we go. Same as I feel. Moving forward, I will mention in 2015, there was a film that I don't think you've seen called Victoria. It's a German crime thriller. It is 134 minutes, shot in a single take. It is a true movie done with one camera working the whole time. They managed to float through 22 locations. The film includes a bank robbery, car chases, a kidnapping, and almost perfectly arrives at a rooftop sunrise moment. It is extraordinarily well done. There were shots in this that are really, really impressive when you know they had to get that just right now.
Mm-hmm.
The film reportedly required very, very much a digital handy cam. It was 3 months of practicing, and then it took them 3 shots to get it right. And there is a massive error in the middle of the existing movie that they worked into the story, which is great.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's a moment where everyone visibly goes, oh no, we're gonna have to start over. And then they just keep going anyway. And the film really works in that respect. Okay, so now all that said, I didn't love Victoria, but I was compelled by it. It is one of those where I got it. And because it's not a movie based on cutting and digital trickery, you really feel how hard they're working for this. So that's Victoria. There's another one where they faked the one-take version. Is a movie called Bushwick from 2017. Are you aware of this?
No,
it's a
not
Dave
at all.
Bautista movie.
No.
It's kind of a people attacking a city movie where 2 people try to survive together. And I mean, again, it's filled with great ideas, but I could not have been less engaged with the plot. But it's got 100 moments where you go, wow, you pulled that off. Great. And finally, the last one I want to mention as a one-take movie, again, this is a real one-take movie, because it was broadcast live as they shot it, was a movie called Lost in London, starring Woody Harrelson as Woody Harrelson, wandering around London having misadventures for, 90 minutes-ish. It is an intolerably irritating film from start to finish. An incredible vanity piece that is cloaked in me playing a version of me that's annoying. Well, mission accomplished. You're super annoying in this film, Woody Harrelson. That is all of my one-take movies that are real and faked that I want to cover, and that's perfect timing because we're about to do an ad. Do you have something you want to mention?
I have 2 that I want to do, but we'll do it after the break.
No, you can... Well, okay, if you have more to say then...
Sure, yes I do. Yeah.
Okay. So, we will be right back after these very important messages from show promos and ads.
Tune in to Ashes Ashes for your weekly dose of modern pop.
So I pitched Rich that the idea behind why we would be promoting the articles we're promoting will be this show. Since they're film articles, film show. I hope he likes it.
Uh-huh.
I mean, if not, I just gotta keep looking.
Yeah, I mean, there's venues out there.
I'll have to figure out what they are, but yeah.
Astrology, bind up, yarn forward. What do all of these terms have in common? They'll all be said during CJLO's Stitch and Bitch on February 6th from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. at the Downtown Archive, located in EV Building 5775. Be sure to bring your crafty projects and your hot topics. That's the CJLO Stitch and Bitch on February 6th.
Oh, good. I just wondered if maybe the date had passed for that. We're back on CJLO 1690 AM. Our show is Cinema Smackdown, and today we are talking about One Take, based on last week's episode of discussing at length the movie 1917, which is essentially shaped to appear like a single-take movie. We decided this week to cover the general topic of single-take films, which we're almost through.
Some of which are real, and some of which are also similarly digitally faked.
Yeah, and then in a moment or two after Shane gets through his, we're going to talk about the scenes in movies that are particularly effective or ineffective over time. And when I did the research for this, I will tell you, I found some reminders of one takes. So as I said earlier, we're going to cover stuff that seems a little obvious, but we're also going to get into a few films people may not even realize have wonderful one-take scenes, and that's the fun of this episode, so I'm going to get to talk about those. So, Shane, you have 2 more one-take movies
I have 2 more
Sure.
genuine one-take movies, feature-length films, or longer. The first one being the 2002 Russian film called Russian Ark.
Yeah, I haven't seen it.
Yeah, it's in.
I will say I watched the first 3 minutes and gave up.
Here's what I recommend. I mean, the
is
film.
this one of your famous get high and watch movie recommendations? Because I know you love to.
Oh
do
yeah,
that.
you know me. I'm both Cheech and Chong all rolled into one. No, Russia Ark is a film that was shot in the Hermitage Museum overnight.
Yeah,
they
they
had
did.
1 night to shoot
I
this.
heard that.
Yeah. They had. I think they had 3, perhaps 4, but I think it was only 3 takes. And the first 2 takes, they screwed it up in the first 20 minutes. And by the time they had 1 more go, they realized, oh my god, we have to get through all 90 minutes of this in real time. And so far, we have not had a good run at it. And that last take, they nailed it.
Right.
And there's extremely complex stuff that's happening because it's sort of a journey through the last 200 years of Russian history. Your mileage may vary as far as how compelling a narrative that is for you.
3 minutes.
But it is, yeah, it is an extremely well-made film. It gets down to that last sequence, and there's one moment where like, oh my god, you saved this for the end because there's so many moving parts that you can't believe that. It's another one where, okay, and if we screwed it up right at the end, we were done. And especially this film because they really did have just the 1 night to shoot after planning this and planning this and planning this. If they screwed it up, there would not be another opportunity. The window would be closed.
Right.
But if that film is not your cup of tea, I cannot recommend this highly enough, the making of documentary about the film, which is itself a feature-length film. And it is one of the most nail-biting, suspense-ridden films I've ever seen in my life as they go through this harrowing experience of, can we get this in the can or not? And I watched that documentary right after seeing the film itself, and even though I knew, it all comes out in the end because they got the film, it's still a real nail-biter of a documentary. So there's my recommendation, even higher than the film itself.
Right.
Although the film itself is an incredible achievement.
And that I can sustain almost 3 minutes of interest in.
It is not a film for you.
That is not a dig on the real movie, of course.
Yeah.
It's a wonderfully created film, clearly. By the way, I read one piece of trivia about it, and I can't tell if it was reported incorrectly or not. But the IMDb lists that it was a 4,500 team member movie. That seems insane to me. 450, I believe.
I mean, maybe if
But
you're counting the
4,500.
museum personnel who had to participate and
I
cooperate.
have no idea. That seems like a decimal point error almost.
There is the moment, that end scene where they just fill the floor with people in period costume dancing.
Oh, then it's possible.
That seems
like a
high,
crazy
but okay.
number. I think they said 4,500 technical people.
Again, I'm guessing they're counting museum personnel who had to participate in this. One other long take film that I need to mention, and this one you legitimately don't have to spend more than 3 minutes on, if that. But I feel I should mention the 1964 8-hour epic Andy Warhol's Empire.
I don't even count that.
It is a single static shot of the Empire State Building from early evening until 3 a.m. Very few people have endured this. There is an hour.
You're mistaken that very few.
Well,
it is done as an event. People have badges of honor of sitting through the whole thing.
Yeah, I'm guessing few can boast that they actually sat there with their eyes fixed on the screen. They may have been at a party where it was playing on a wall.
That is actually what happens in a cinema. People tend to make it a social event.
I don't think most people can go that long without
But I mean,
peeing.
that's like an imbecile getting a camera and saying, I made a project and you all have to endure this now. It's not a great piece of work.
Supposedly, Warhol would challenge people who were visiting the factory to sit down and watch the whole thing.
He was legendarily a monster on a number of levels, and this is just one more of those.
I mean, the film is what it is. It's an artifact. You don't need to see it. You can watch the whole thing on YouTube. It's there.
God bless you, YouTube.
You could skip through and just say, oh yeah, well, basically the sun goes down. That's about what happens in the film. But reading reviews on the IMDb is a hilarious experience because, they're just people who are apparently angry at this film. It's like, it's just a static shot for 8 hours. Who cares?
Yeah.
And if you sat through more than 3 minutes of this, what are you doing with your life?
It does have a twist ending, though. At any rate, I want to get into our epic oneers.
Sure.
I will say that as much as humanly possible, I'd really just like to name check the famous ones and move on as much as possible.
Fine.
So, going chronologically, I will start with the one I have the least I want to say about, and that is Touch of Evil.
Uh-huh.
It
is the most famous one.
Exactly. It's so well known. It's wonderful. See both versions. See the version that is scored.
Right.
And see the version that is just the radios playing.
Yeah. It is the background music that's going on.
Both versions are interesting. They're great. It's a wonderful sequence, but a million billion people have talked about it. So let's move directly to 1972 to a movie I didn't even really think about as having multiple oneers in it. It's Hitchcock's Frenzy. There are multiple segments in this film where the camera waits. You hang out when someone goes into a room to murder someone, and the camera waits outside.
Mm-hmm.
This long, tense moment, and you realize, we're not cutting to anything. We're just left in this moment.
Well, the one I always remember is the camera that slowly recoils from the scene of the murder down the stairs and out the apartment building and into the streets where the rest of the world is just going on as normal.
Exactly. So Frenzy is a fascinating one for that. It's never brought up.
Frenzy is certainly notable as being Hitchcock's penultimate film.
It's also the one movie that he talked about as being the full realization of what he always wanted to do, which was essentially make an absolute exploitation film, which it is the darkest, nastiest, dirtiest of all of his movies.
Yes, and I always point to that and a few other moments in his career for people who go, "Oh, Hitchcock wouldn't have done this way. He would have cut away." It's like, no, Hitchcock loved the gristle, and the thing is, he worked in an era where you weren't allowed to show that, so he had to suggest it as much as possible. Yeah. If he were working today, he'd probably be making Saw movies.
He'd be Eli Roth.
Yeah, probably.
With more art.
With more overt bathroom humor and sexual violence.
As I understand it, he was a big bathroom humor guy.
Notoriously, he included the initials BM for bowel movement in many of his films.
Oh, dear God. Yeah. One day I'll tell you his John Landis story, which we don't have time for today. It's terrible. So, moving on from Frenzy in 1972, in 1978, the first 6 or so minutes of the movie Halloween by John Carpenter is a one take from the point of view of a small child pulling a mask over his face and wandering through his house to murder. It didn't even occur to me until I looked at lists of things. Oh, that's right. It's a one shot. I think it's got a fake cut or two in it, but it's quite good. And it definitely sets the scene.
It is the opening shot of a movie that forces the audience to be the murderer.
Yeah, exactly. So that's Halloween from 1978. I move forward to 1985 for the opening sequence of Back to the Future, which I'm guessing a lot of people don't even realize is a long single take of a camera moving through Doc Brown's house, panning across all the clocks, the long clock scene, and then coming all the way around. It's a very interesting single take. It's so different than the rest of that movie and the rest of the whole series of the Back to the Future films. It's kind of interesting that it opens on this super calm credit sequence and then becomes the kind of high-flying sci-fi comedy that it is.
Mm-hmm.
But, I've often used Back to the Future as an example of basically a perfect movie for me.
Mm-hmm.
It's close. I really like it. And it hasn't dwindled or gone down in... How old is it now?
Well, we're past the 30-year mark. We're 35 years now. Yeah,
35. Wow.
We are farther out from it than the trip into the future, the far-flung future year of 2015.
I know. Oh dear God.
Yeah.
So, this is another one I'll touch on, but I have no interest in delving into the 8-minute opening shot from The Player.
Yep.
Now, I actually will mention one thing about the opening from the player, and it will go towards other movies I will name check quickly and don't want to get into. I'm not crazy about the ones that are essentially over-the-shoulder shots of people meeting person after person after person as a one take. I don't care for them.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the most famous movie one takes are exactly that.
That's true.
And most of those don't really work for me. In fact, it's true, I skipped it. So I skipped the one that came just before this, which is Goodfellas.
Yeah, that was the one that left in mind as soon as he said the meeting a bunch of people.
Yeah, and sorry, but who cares? In terms of just having the camera follow people through a restaurant as we zoom around the room and then focus on Vinny, who's got a funny line, and then focus on somebody else, all the while the narrator explaining their purpose in life.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not wowed. It's not... Doing the very, very difficult technical aspect of making those scenes work, it doesn't add much to the narrative for me. It's like, that is very much the director's trick of, look how great I am, as opposed to having a moment that roots me in the story. Again, these are personal. A lot of people would angrily argue with me about this, and I appreciate that. Post the player, one that is impossible to skip in terms of quality of work and incredible craftsmanship, is the Shootout in Hard Boiled from 1992,
Yep.
which is, we've probably talked about it on this show before, an incredible sequence of two men running down a corridor, firing and murdering man after man after man who are trying to stop them from reaching their goal.
Mm-hmm.
And it's incredibly done. It has a single cut hidden in the middle of it, and it is two sequences that are just mind-blowingly extraordinary. It's a phenomenal accomplishment on John Woo's part. And because it's one take in an entire movie of action, it really stands out as this nice, involving sequence.
It's also the great technical element of, again, sort of like Tom Yum Goong, where they ruin the set. This is a lot of violence and set destruction, and we follow the characters into an elevator.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a personal scene between them in the elevator, like just this calm minute or so where they just talk as they supposedly go to another level. But what's really happening is outside the elevator, everyone is descending on the set to redress it, fix things, change it to be the next location that they're going to destroy.
Right. So moving forward... I'll mention to our listeners that you're listening to CJLO 1690 AM. Our show is called Cinema Smackdown. I'm Michael, this is Shane, and today we're talking about one-take movies, and more specifically, the one-take sequences within the films that really resonate and are of interest. So I will move on now to the 1994 movie Pulp Fiction, which has a one-take scene in it. And I'll use that as a springboard to quickly mention all the ones I remember from Tarantino's work.
Mm-hmm.
So in Pulp Fiction, there is a long sequence in which Bruce Willis walks through backyards, where we just follow him and follow him and follow him as he winds his way back towards his own apartment to make sure there's no one waiting there to kill him. And it's a long scene of him walking through backyards and things, and you overhear the radio coming through someone's house at one point, giving you a piece of information, and you just watch it. It's just a hangout moment. It's all right.
So, wait, you mean Bruce Willis used to make films where he didn't sit behind a desk and answer phones?
I mean, it's hard to believe, but
there used to be some physicality to his acting.
I cannot wait to see Die Hard 6 Paperwork. Paperwork with a vengeance.
You're finally gone too far. We're putting you in a desk job now.
So Tarantino did
It'll be him and Al.
I will mention that he has a similar scene in Reservoir Dogs where we follow the Michael Madsen character in the middle of torturing the police officer. The camera follows him outside into the parking lot, to his car, where he grabs a few items, takes a moment to himself, wanders back into the it's a whole sequence that is all in a oneer, and it really is tense. That scene works great. And,
nice that he wasn't stealing the blocking from Ringo Lam again.
Just for one moment.
Yeah. Just shooting some original material in Reservoir Dogs.
So beyond that, there's Kill Bill, which has an extended sequence of seeing everything going on at a club, where the camera just goes round and around the room, up over walls, following different people walking around until it arrives at the bride character preparing to attack. Yeah, that was one of those technique ones that didn't really work for me, but that's life. Almost the entirety of Tarantino's segment in 4 rooms in the hotel is built out of essentially a bunch of oneers, but there are insert shots and things. That actually just feels very lazy. It feels like he tried to shoot the whole thing without much coverage and really just...
Yeah, well, I imagine there are infinite numbers of films where the whole thing was done in a single take, but then they would reset the camera up in another angle and then tell everyone run through it again, and then cut it all together.
Yeah, and sometimes it works and sometimes it's horrendous. Finally, there's Death Proof, which has a segment in which, I believe it's because Death Proof is basically cut into 2 pieces, 2 major acts. I believe it's the beginning of the second act. There's a sequence, actually I don't know which act it is. There's a sequence around a table with women all having a quick conversation that you get halfway through about a 4 or 5 minute conversation and realize the camera's just going around.
Yeah, that's the
and
beginning of the
around.
second act, yeah.
And I like that scene. That is the moment, though, where most people will point to Tarantino's dialogue specifically and say, yeah, women don't talk like this.
Nobody in the real world talks like they talk in a Tarantino film. That's
in
fine.
In particular, that sequence, yes, and I agree.
It's stylized,
it's fine. It's fine. That's one of the... I have a lot of nitpicking to do about his career, but that's not one of them. So, moving on from Pulp Fiction in 94, I will bring up a very accomplished sequence in the movie Strange Days from 1995.
Oh, yes.
A 5-minute through the eyes of sequence where essentially the camera is the protagonist as they have a series of complex adventures, physical adventures, running and jumping, including, I think, a bit of a gunfight and a leap across a building rooftop, which is harrowing when seen in a big screen. It's a super well accomplished sequence which took quite a long time to do and does have a couple of magic cuts in it.
Yes.
But they're good.
Yes,
It's quite good.
so magic cuts are when, in a long take, there is an edit, but it's disguised well enough that you don't notice it. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to remember who told me this, but someone, I think it's someone I know from years ago, was at the premiere for Strange Days.
It would be our occasional guest, Bern Larmouth.
Oh,
He was in England seeing the film with Catherine Bigelow in attendance.
Ah, okay, because was it him or was it someone else at that screening where Catherine Bigelow took questions from the audience? And
It was him.
It was him, okay, and she
said, I bet you'll never catch this magic cut, and he said,
Yeah,
is it on the staircase?
Yeah,
and she was
yeah.
like, crestfallen.
Okay, I didn't realize it was Bern.
Yep.
I've come to know him better since that story was first relayed to me. So
in 1995.
Yeah, exactly.
At any rate, it's worth seeing, and what I like about that sequence is it's a movie that opens with a massive oneer. That sounds like a very strange thing. But then moves on to being traditional narrative, and so it really functions in its own capacity. Although the film does have multiple sequences through the eyes of, because of the nature of the story, that it being the VR experience movie. Anyway, so Strange Days of note. I feel like you're not jumping in with any, but because I'm doing them chronologically.
No, I don't want to screw up your chronology because I have a more scattershot.
Okay, but
list.
if I pass a year that has something that you want to mention, please feel free. There's a very interesting sequence in 1995's Living in Oblivion. The whole first chunk of the movie is essentially a one-take sequence. And then, when the movie breaks and comes back for the second act, there's a part, it's about filmmaking, and there is a part of the movie in which the Steve Buscemi director character is trying to get a moment in a single take, and they shoot it several times and things just keep going wrong, including the actors flubbing their lines, technical issues, different problems, and he finally agrees to break it into pieces, which is clearly breaking his heart in the scene, because it's just supposed to be an emotional moment between two women, and they do a quick run-through, and they get it exactly right. And had the cameras been rolling, he realizes they would have caught the moment exactly as he intended. And because they get it exactly right without the cameras, he essentially has a nervous breakdown on the set. It's an amazing moment, all to do with the idea of trying to capture a one-take scene. So, one of maybe the greatest example of what that means to the industry, especially with the fit he has at the end. In 1996, this is one of the ones I've never seen on a list, which kind of astonishes me because it's so good. And a lot of these are going to be spoiler-filled, because how can you not at least acknowledge that something happens in these moments? But there's a movie called Big Night from 1996. It's a Stanley Tucci film. He co-directed with Campbell Scott. He stars in the movie as a restaurateur who runs a restaurant with his brother. And it's an emotional comedy. It has a lot of humor in it. It's two brothers trying to prepare a big night for a critic who's supposed to come in and positively review the restaurant, possibly saving them from bankruptcy. The entire film has there's very high stakes involved. Things go horrifically wrong throughout the film during the big night. Parts of it go quite well, but ultimately it's not a huge success, and the brothers have a massive falling out during the film, which is the core of the film. At any rate, the movie climaxes on a one-take scene. A calm moment the next morning where the two brothers are in their kitchen, and one of them, in real time, prepares an omelet. And we watch the entire production in one take. And as this is all happening, and he prepares the omelet, and he cuts it into pieces and hands it out between himself and his brother, there's a moment where they acknowledge silently that things are okay. And it's magical. That is possibly the most effective one take I've ever seen. Just because it actually made me care about everything I had seen in the last 90 minutes.
So is it a companion piece to the one-take crying pie-eating scene from Ghost Story?
Yeah. No, that is not an example of the great versions of those. Having a different perspective on the one-take scene would be, like, that is a calm emotional moment, would be Snake Eyes.
I was waiting for you. Yeah.
Which is a 13-minute cobbled together single take. So it has a lot of magic cuts, an awful lot of them, but they're all a lot of fun, and that will, of course, bring us into just like the Tarantino bit, I have a few De Palma movies to mention, but Snake Eyes...
Snake Eyes is particularly notable because that whole sequence was shot in our largely late and lamented Forum.
Yeah, in the Montreal Forum.
Before they turned it into an economic dead zone.
It is a loving tribute to a building, because you get to watch the camera follow people down hallways that are, if you were here at the time, quite recognizable. So you get a lot of the geography of the original Forum before it was demolition happened.
And you get Nicolas Cage eating that scenery every step of the way.
It's still at the point where he's a legitimate actor.
Oh, there's moments.
And
there's a lot
so over the top.
I think that was really the beginning of Nicolas Cage going down that tunnel.
And he, the wonderful thing about the sequence of Snake Eyes is that we meet his character, we establish what kind of a man he is throughout multiple interactions with different people, and the whole sequence, again, 13 minutes long, leading up to a murder, which is the crux of the film. Shots are fired, things are happening, and the whole thing builds up to the shots being fired, and that's the first cut of the movie, the first true recognizable cut. Mm-hmm. It's an amazing accomplishment. I actually really like Snake Eyes, despite the fact that, wow, does it have problems. And it has
that's kind of every De Palma film.
It also has a terrible last sequence. The last couple of scenes are not great. And the thing is, it's a reshoot. I've seen the movie we all know, and I have read extensively what the original cut had, including a multi-million-dollar disaster sequence, which is telegraphed throughout the film as we're seeing weather report after weather report, and the main character even mentions, I have this recurring dream where I'm drowning in a tunnel, all of which comes to pass at the end, all of which was cut and has never been seen by the general public. I would love to see that sequence. I'm sure it's a much more satisfying ending to a broken but interesting film.
Which very few people remember beyond that opening sequence.
Yeah, exactly. So beyond Snake Eyes, of course, there's a oneer in nearly every De Palma film. Some notable ones would be Bonfire of the Vanities, which is, again, it's kind of an over-the-shoulder, let's meet a bunch of people in a row scene, but it's all through the eyes of obscenely drunken Bruce Willis. That's another wonder with Bruce Willis where we're following him along. And he's being ferried to an event through a building, and each person he meets, he's just more obnoxious with. It's kind of a wonderful sequence. There's also a long sequence in Blowout, the wonderful Travolta movie from the early 80s. And of course, probably one of the most famous of his is the long train station chase scene in Carlito's Way. It's all taken as a wonder with a fantastic last moment before the cut. It has a lot of suspense, and the last moments are very interesting. It's really well designed. That's another one where I'm more into this moment.
You've told me the story behind that take.
Have I? Because it's not coming to mind.
Isn't there a screw up right at the end that it wasn't able to be what it was meant to be?
I've forgotten what that was, but yes, there was something in there, and I've forgotten the anecdote.
Oh, okay.
So we're not going to get back to it today.
There was some technical problem right at the end of the shot, so it didn't end on the moment it was supposed to.
I remember now. Yeah. It's just a question of that it was supposed to end on a full shot of Pacino doing something, and he just didn't step into the shot, so they couldn't use that part of it, and it ends earlier than it needs to. So yeah, there was a mistake in there, which is pretty funny. I totally forgot about it. This brings us forward to the year 2000, where there was a movie called Unbreakable, the Bruce Willis and M. Night Shyamalan film that
never had a sequel.
Not in my eyes. That has it is an entire film constructed of closed one-take scenes. It is sequence after sequence of 3 to 5 minutes moments that are mostly one take. There are exceptions. There's a few things that have inserts and things like that. But there's so many of these that build the movie. And it's structurally very interesting because they're one takes that end. And then another one and another. Part of the problem with the one take scene that people, especially building a movie around them, that I've heard technicians on film mention is that, well, you're only covering a moment one way. So in the editing room, if something doesn't work, you have nothing. You can't go anywhere. So you have to be extremely confident and have some technical chops, otherwise your movie will be bad. I would argue that Unbreakable is very successful on a number of levels. All of its many wonders. I'll guess there's at least 10 in this one. Possibly more. You don't even remember that aspect?
No, I do. I have seen the film not that long ago for whatever viewing it was. But I was thinking, that's sort of the opposite of the Sam Raimi technique, which is he edits in his head. So he only shoots as much of, sometimes very short shots that he knows he will need in the editing room. And I remember this particularly because when Gene Hackman was working with him on The Quick and the Dead, Hackman did not care for this technique at all.
And didn't work within it. There were so many fixes in that movie that Raimi had to do because Hackman was like, I'm not stopping there. I'm not walking to that mark the way you want me to, so you can cut to this other thing. It was one of those relationships where after a very short period of filming, Hackman had to relay his opinions to a second party that would relay them to Raimi because he wouldn't speak to him directly. Isn't that an awesome thing to hear about Gene Hackman?
Well, I have never heard anything particularly good about Gene Hackman's working relationship with anybody.
Yeah. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with a few more thoughts on Oneers and the industry in general and how it works around these interesting segments. We'll be right back.
Hey, CJ.
Well, we have touched upon everything on my list, so...
Haven't?
Have.
Oh, we have.
Yeah.
I got 20 more. We have more than I'm going to be able to get to by the running time. Oh, that's right. I wouldn't mind mentioning the TV ones, because there's some TV ones of note. But they're just little. They're just like, this one. But, fun show.
Boost your resume by studying abroad and get that dream job. Don't miss the studying.
I'm aching to talk about other film stuff not related to this episode at all. That as soon as we're off the air,
yeah, I get it. It'll be our Patreon episode. 5 seconds.
Yep.
And we're back on CJLO 1690 AM. Our show is called Cinema Smackdown. Today we're talking about one-take scenes in movies, and we already covered earlier one-take movies, which are real and or faked, both of which are of note. We recently mentioned, what did we get through last? Unbreakable. I'll quickly mention a few that are very famous for having interesting one-take scenes. Of course, there is 2002's Irreversible, which is essentially 10 one-take scenes shown in a reverse Seinfeldian order.
Right.
But I will say, of course...
I remember that horrible episode of what happened to George Costanza in that underpass.
There is, of course, that big sequence in Irreversible, which is a brutal handling of a
9-minute
character.
long
Yeah,
single take.
Yeah, it's rough. And it is the reason, for the most part, that people cannot endure this movie. It's a bit too intense, a bit too rough.
Yeah, it is. Although kudos to both those actors for getting through that sequence because...
Many times, apparently.
Oh, jeez.
At any rate, we don't need to touch too much on that one. It's very famously reported on, as well as 2003's Old Boy, which features one of the most stunning hammer fights in movie history. An amazing accomplishment, but again, people have talked about it. I actually am very fond of the attempt to repeat the hammer fight in the much maligned, probably justifiably so, remake of Old Boy, where they doubled the hammer fight scene, as if only to say, we know you've seen the other one. Here's an extra doubling of this, which seemed a little outrageous.
There is also the Bollywood remake that also has to do the hammer scenes.
Oh, does it?
Yes.
I haven't seen that. So that's very interesting. A movie that employs just a couple of oneers in very effective ways is Shaun of the Dead from 2004. They have the first scene where the apocalypse has happened, and Shaun, in a one-shot take, walks out of his house, opens his front gate, wanders to the corner store, is completely oblivious to the fact that cars are crashed, zombies are in the distance, blood is everywhere, goes to the corner store, buys
the blood-smeared cooler.
Exactly, and it goes on and on, all the way to him walking all the way back to his house, completely oblivious, and we, the audience, are screaming at him, "Turn around, you idiot, you're about to be eaten." It's a good scene. But there are scenes like that in pretty much every Edgar Wright movie, but then again, Edgar Wright is a genius, and his ability to bring me into moments is almost unparalleled in a lot of ways, so he's kind of a special guy. We mentioned Tom Yum-Goong from 2005, we've mentioned Atonement at length from 2007, which is a very accomplished sequence.
There is one I wanted to mention in the context of it brought me to a different film. So Gravity has a famous opening. Long. I know you're not impressed, but it got me thinking. Oh yeah, George Clooney. Oh right, of course there was this other long take he was involved in. That was one of the great failure ones. So Soderbergh, when he was shooting Out of Sight.
Oh, I've seen it. Yes.
Yeah, there is a long take, and this is available as an extra on the DVD. When George Clooney and Jennifer Lopez are locked together in a trunk, and they have close to like a 10-minute scene of them. It's sort of their meet cute where they have a long discussion as they're locked in the trunk of a driving car.
I will argue that scene is terrible.
Well, it is
emotionally ineffective.
Yes, there's a reason that long take version of it was cut in particular. Is it doesn't work, and the reason it doesn't work is Jennifer Lopez is a terrible actress.
Clooney is also at fault with delivering ham-fisted versions of some of the lines in that sequence.
I think Clooney's okay, but it's Jennifer Lopez in that long take version. She fidgets constantly, and it's meant to convey discomfort, obviously, and it is just irritating as hell to watch.
Fully agree.
I agree that scene had to go, and it's a pity. Because it was it could have been good.
It's interesting, but it's a bad scene.
But, as many Soderbergh things it was an experiment, and that one didn't work.
Right. So, post-Atonement from 2007, we have also in 2007, Rec, or however you're supposed to pronounce the title in brackets of REC.
Record.
I hate calling it Rec, because it just sounds like it has to start with a W.
Right.
At any rate, Rec is the zombie handheld from the point of view of a camera crew movie, so there are plenty of one-take scenes.
Yes, there is a zombie-like outbreak in an apartment building in Spain.
Many moments of following that camera shot. I mean, it's jerky and not particularly artistic, but it is effective in the horror element.
Yes,
in many
because it is a very you are there docudrama point of view type of film, there are certain shocking things that happen that are just alarming. I showed this to, movie night back in the day, and we had someone's mom sitting in.
That's the perfect night.
Yeah. And she was not prepared for this because it begins as, we're just following a news crew as they're hanging out with firemen. And it's like, we got a call from this place, and let's go along. And the outbreak scenario starts to escalate, and there's a moment where someone falls from one of the upper levels and splats in the middle of the lobby, and that's the moment where she had to ask, "Wait, is this real?"
I mean, up until then, it could very well just be
up until then, yes,
a documentary.
Yeah, it's one of those contrived. It's not really found footage because no one's, they're very purposely shooting this for a television show, supposedly. But its very nature is just keep shooting no matter what happens. And, it does have that contrived thing of that particular subgenre of horror films where who in their right mind would keep filming?
All right, I'm going to quickly speed through the titles and ideas behind about 5 of these so I can get to one from 2017 that we can actually talk about for a few minutes, which I think is of note. So, of course, Cloverfield from 2008 is almost identical to Rec in that it is a handheld person walking around filming things. There's tons and tons, but Cloverfield, of course, is covered in special effects, so barely matters.
But it's nice that it starts out looking like the lowest budgeted film ever, and by the time things start to happen, it feels like it's the most expensive film ever made.
There is JCVD from 2008, which opens with an extended scene of Jean-Claude Van Damme fighting people in a oneer, and it's a wonderful scene in an otherwise unwatchable movie that got a lot of praise, but I despise that guy, so watching a movie that's an ode to him was
it is Jean-Claude Van Damme giving the performance of his life as Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Hannah from 2011 has multiple oneers, including a busy bus station sequence, which is extraordinary. Really notable...
Again, from the director of Atonement, so he knows his way around a one-shot.
A really, really notable oneer is in a movie from 2013, pretty much no one has seen, called The Place Beyond the Pines, which opens with Ryan Gosling, and one shot follows him from his trailer, going all over the place into a globe of death, which is one of those things you ride on a motorcycle around, and it gets right into that moment. It's a pretty extraordinary sequence. The movie 99 Homes, starring Michael Shannon, has an opening scene with him that is several minutes long, following him being an awful human being, and just having various conversations with people about awfulness, and just being a person who takes advantage of suffering. That really puts you in the mood. There's, of course, the John Wick series has multiple one-shot takes, or at least faked one-shots. They're quite extraordinary in all 3 films. The 2 Kingsman movies have oneers that are so laden with CGI it barely matters. I kind of like them, but I kind of hate them, which is kind of my review of the movie. And that brings us to 2017's One Cut of the Dead.
Yeah.
And if we're going to talk about anything for the last 3 minutes of the show, it should probably be that. A movie that opens with a 30-minute? How long?
No, it's 40 minutes.
40-minute single-take sequence, which is definitely built out of chunks, but works extremely well.
No, that was shot in one go, I believe.
I don't believe you.
Look it up because
things in that. But it's a movie about making a one-take movie, which includes a one-take movie as its first act.
Right.
And then is a behind-the-scenes film, which is an emotional journey of building that one-take movie. It is a fantastic, extremely well-made movie. I didn't love it, but I will say the last 10 minutes of that film are so moving when you see them really working to get the film finished. Mm-hmm. All the little tricks they had to do. There's some triumph in this that is you're unlikely to see. What language is this in?
Japanese.
It's a Japanese film, that's correct. So One Cut of the Dead from 2017. Shane, give me your take on it.
So it's like a low budget, bottom of the barrel experimental student film for 40 minutes. And I've shown this to people and said, bear with it. Bear with it. It goes somewhere interesting. and you get that whole film, and then you find out, yeah, that was the film. Now here's the story of why that film got made and who made it and how it happened. And you see all the rough edges of the film suddenly in this much more professionally shot film as the crew goes around and plans this thing and eventually shoots it by the seat of their pants because...
And everything is a compromise.
Yeah,
everything you saw in that first 40 minutes was compromised.
Yeah, and every moment you thought was a mistake, well, you find out why that was happening behind the scenes.
If you are interested in the subject of filmmaking, or if you get any kind of glee out of seeing people try to construct something, this may be the best film ever made of that nature.
Yeah.
It's really, really up there.
It is also one of the most financially successful films ever made because it made back 1,000 times its budget. It was shot for...
But it was made for $1.
Well, it was... I mean, the back half of it is a very professional-looking film. The front half looks like the cheap film that it's about. Mm-hmm. But all told, it cost about $25,000 to make.
Yeah.
And it made $25 million domestically in Japan.
And it really is worth... Everyone should see this movie.
Yeah.
Whether you walk away from it not loving it or not, you will.
This was
something.
effectively made by film students, and it was booked to play in a little theater with less than 100 seats.
7 days.
Yeah, for 7 days, and word started to spread, and it got picked up by a real distributor.
Yeah, and that is the greatest story. When something that is really only intended to have a couple of days winds up having a real run, and it, of course, financially successful. It's
right.
Massively financially
Much
successful.
like Russian Ark, the structure of this is, the one-take film, and then if you watch the making-of documentary, this is sort of like watching the making-of documentary after watching the 40-minute film.
Exactly. All connected.
And that documentary element of it is incredibly suspenseful, even though you already know, well, the film got finished because I just watched that film.
Exactly. What a perfect film to end our chat on, to be honest. I hadn't planned it, but it feels like symmetry. I had a couple more I could have mentioned, but frankly, One Cut of the Dead is kind of the best thing to mention on this respect. And it really does put into perspective every one of the movies we talked about in imagining how they accomplished what they got away with. It's a really interesting
the
film.
combination of happy accident and planning.
Yeah. I out of everything we've mentioned, there is Atonement, which I think is perfect at that moment. I don't know which other ones are really the standouts that matter and make the movie better than what it is, but One Cut of the Dead is the one that really wins me over in that respect. It's funny. And of course I add that little nugget at the end of, I didn't love it, but I love what it is. And again, the last 10 minutes, I think I was even told, oh, you'll be moved at the end. Yeah. Impress me. And then I got to the end, it's like, okay. You're right. I am fully engaged by this. All right, well, we've run out of time. Thanks for listening in this week. I've been Michael Brody. I've been joined by Shane Simmons. This has been Cinema Smackdown. We've chatted quite a bit about one-take films. Perhaps next week we will get to the best of 2018. I don't know if it's going to happen.
2018, ooh, can't wait to do that
2019, fine. It all depends on Shane getting around to actually watching some of these movies. But we'll see. We'll have that mystery solved next time.
You're listening to
God, that was a horrible sound at the end.
Yeah. Jesus.
Squelch. That was a lovely episode.
What is up, Concordia? I hope you had a wonderful week. It is Dana Gold here with your community calendar for the week of January 20th to January 26th.
Someone just said Dana Gold, but there is a Dana Gould
Did you
over
forget to
there.
have your flu shot redone?
Very
Have no
close.
fear, because Concordia Health Services, in response to the high
Did he
demand
just say
for
have your flu
has
shot
added a link to
Redone?
the flu shot
Well,
clinic on
I guess
January
redone from
23rd.
last year.
It's going to be going on the EV
Every year it's a new one.
Extension 3565 to reserve your dose. The health professionals
Meanwhile,
at
I'm
Concordia
holding out for the coronavirus
recommend
one.
that everyone get their flu shot every year. And getting
They
the
just
flu
have to
shot will
invent it.
reduce your chance of getting the flu and spreading it to others.
Indeed.
If you catch the flu, being vaccinated can help make your illness less severe.
Yeah, what an odd ad to run. No one cares about the flu right now with the coronavirus.
And get a dose on January 23rd in the EVA train. Get ready to lace up for this one, folks,
Alright.
because I'm pretty excited
Good.
to share
I don't
what
see
Montreal
our
has in store this week.
Next
This Saturday,
episode
January
guy,
25th,
but
2
you know,
p.m.
he doesn't like to start on time. So
Great Canadian Kiltscape. And they invite everyone to dress in
Top of the hour or 10 minutes later, who cares?
Celebrate their Scottishness
Weird, huh?
in a very Canadian way. On ice. That's right, folks. Bring all your Scottish gear,